Luke 19, chapter 19, beginning with verse 1, reading from the New International Version, the word of the Lord is as follows. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Jesus had entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately." I want to preach today from the subject, Jesus stops again. Jesus stops again. Once more, we revisit the notion of Jesus, who is mostly known for being on the move, but on this occasion and others, he stops. The man on the move, the man with purpose, the man with an agenda, the man with a schedule, stops. And as the revelation of God, Jesus reveals, as much as God is one who moves, God is also one who stops. God is not simply located or recognized in movement, but God is also found in stillness. He stops. The instances where Jesus is seen stopping are ones where he is going somewhere important and still stops. He's on his way to Jairus' house, supposedly to keep Jairus' daughter from dying, and stops after being touched by the woman with the issue of blood. He stops on Jairus and stops for the woman. We learn that Jesus' stopping on us is sometimes due to Jesus stopping for. That God can seemingly stop on us for others as well as for us. That Jesus stops his movement but not his presence. That is, things can come to a screeching halt, but it doesn't mean the Lord has left you. The Lord is still with you. Jesus' stopping does not cancel his arriving, it just delays it. and that the time for stopping often sets the stage for a greater revelation. The second occasion was in the last verses of the previous chapter, since Luke chapter 9, verse 51, which reads, "As the time approached for him to be taken up, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem." Jesus has been on a purposeful march towards the hour for which he had come into the world. He has a date with the cross on the outskirts of Jerusalem. The very redemption of the world rests on his meeting that moment. The further that he travels, the closer he is to the arrival and what awaits him. A caravan grows larger as he moves from town to town. Jesus is very much a man on the move. And in the midst of that movement, there's a man on the side who cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, mercy, have mercy on me." And above the din of feet and voices, Jesus hears the man's cry, stops and calls the man to be brought to him, asks the man what does he want, and then fulfills the man's request by restoring his sight. Jesus stops at the sound of somebody sensitive to who he is, aware of the possibility of change that he can provide, and of what he needs most from the Lord, which is mercy. It is here that chapter 19 picks up with Jesus entering and passing through Jericho. Now, having reached Jericho, Jesus now would be moving southwestward toward Bethany and then towards Jerusalem. In other words, Jesus is in the home stretch of his journey from Galilee. And in the midst of this, Luke alerts us to a very rich man named Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector in the region. And he has one desire, and that is to get a look at Jesus, but he can't because he's vertically challenged. That's a nice way to say he's short. And he is too short to be able to see over the crowd. Now, his wealth would make him a big shot, but his height renders him too short to see Jesus. You see, my friends, and lest we fool ourselves, even those who consider ourselves not to be vertically challenged, there can still be some things that keep us from seeing Jesus. In fact, everybody has a short issue. There is something about us that can crowd our ability to see Jesus. In fact, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. You may not consider yourself to be short, but short is your category as well. What hinders you from seeing the Lord? What blocks him from being seen by you when he desires to be seen by you? Now, not only is Zacchaeus physically short, but because he's the chief tax collector in the region, he is not positively regarded by the people. He is seen as a separate type of sinner. You will recall in Luke chapter 15, the charge against Jesus is that he eats with tax collectors and sinners. Tax collector was viewed to be a separate category of sinner because they were participating in their own people's oppression and marginalization by Rome. Rome was charging taxes, and then there were people who were Jewish who would collect the taxes, and Rome said you could add a surcharge to what we charge, and we will have soldiers enforce not only what we charge, but what you charge as well. They were viewed as traitors to the nation. And therefore, Zacchaeus is not just physically compromised, but he's morally and he's socially compromised. There's an inner tension within him, but the inner tension is surpassed by his desire to see Jesus. Do you see him running ahead and climbing up a sycamore fig tree in order to see Jesus. Now, Zacchaeus does not know Jesus. He has not sent Jesus an email about his desire to see Jesus. There's been no appointment made with any of the disciples about Zacchaeus seeing Jesus. He is not mentioned as shouting anything out to Jesus. Luke tells us Jesus approaches and appears ready to pass by, but then verse 5 says, when Jesus came to the spot, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and called to Zacchaeus, saying, Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your house today. Now look at this. With Jesus passing through Jericho, with Bethany being his next scheduled stop, and Zacchaeus up in a tree to get a look at Jesus, Jesus comes to the tree, looks up, and calls Zacchaeus by name to come down so that Jesus could stay at Zacchaeus' house. Now, again, there is no mention of Zacchaeus requesting anything of Jesus or doing anything overtly to get Jesus' attention. It just says that when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up, called Zacchaeus, and implicit with Jesus coming to the spot, looking up and calling Zacchaeus down, is Jesus stopping at the place where Zacchaeus is. Jesus stops again. Jesus is stopping at the place where Zacchaeus was, indicates that Jesus knew where Zacchaeus was without being told that Zacchaeus was there. With it looking like Jesus was passing by the spot, Luke observes Jesus reaches the spot. He stops at the spot. And Jesus' stopping for Zacchaeus was due to his being aware of Zacchaeus. Jesus stops for because he's aware of. He knew that Zacchaeus was in the tree. Reaching the tree, Jesus stops and addresses Zacchaeus in the tree. I guess what I'm trying to let somebody know, Jesus' stopping for us is due to Jesus' awareness of us. And just as Jesus was aware of Zacchaeus, Jesus is aware of us. Now, I need for you to notice the specificity here. The specificity of knowing the spot and the person. Jesus knew the place and the name of the person in the place without being told of either of them. Jesus knew the place and the person without the person telling him, I'm there. And just as Jesus knew who Zacchaeus was and the place where Zacchaeus was, so does the Lord know who we are, and the Lord knows where we are. The psalmist makes it clear in Psalm 139. The psalmist says, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. There's not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You've hedged me behind and before, and you've laid your hand upon me. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell at the uttermost parts of the sea, even there will your hand lead me, and your right hand will hold me. Even if I make my bed in hell, you are right there. I guess what I want somebody to know is the Lord knows you. And the Lord knows you by name. And the Lord knows you by your location, by your situation. He knows the spots that you're in. He knows when we're in the trees. He knows when our shortages, our limitations, our compromises put us in trees. He knows when the tension between who we are and how we are and our desire to see him drives us to tree climbing because we want to see him. And because of that, the Lord comes right to the spot where we are. He comes right where the tension is. He comes right where the issue is. He comes right where the problem is. He comes right where the wrestling is. He comes right where the disappointment is. He comes right where the fall is. That's the Lord's M.O. Don't you see Adam and Eve hiding out in the garden, trying to hide in the place that the Lord made? And the Lord comes right to where they are, the cool of the day. And he asked, where are you? Not that he didn't know where they were. He just wants them to think about, where are you right now? Because the Lord knows exactly where we are and who we are and how we are. And he stops for us out of his awareness of us. The Lord knows exactly where each one of us is right now. He not only knows what pew you're in or wherever you are, but he knows where you are. Yeah. Where you are. As I'm looking at people here in the building, you're not just here in the building, but you're also someplace in the building. There are things going on in your life. There are thoughts and feelings going on right now, and he knows where you are and where you are. Because see, you may be here but not here at the same time. He knows where we are. He knows where we are physically and where we are emotionally and where we are spiritually and where we are relationally. And he stops right where we are out of his awareness of where we are. But notice further that when Jesus reaches the spot where Zacchaeus is, Jesus calls for him to come down immediately because Jesus must stay at Zacchaeus' house that day. Jesus is stopping where Zacchaeus is due to a purpose that Jesus has for Zacchaeus. Now, we've got to realize Zacchaeus was in the tree so that he could see Jesus. That's why he's in the tree. Luke doesn't tell us he runs in the sycamore tree so that Jesus could come home with him. No. All that Zacchaeus wants is to see Jesus as Jesus is passing by. That's all he has on his agenda. Seeing Jesus as Jesus is passing by. It's as if imagine that the Panthers won the Super Bowl. I said, just imagine if the Panthers won the Super Bowl and there was the parade uptown, and you wanted to see, who would you want to see? You want to see Steve Wilkes, the coach, as he's passing by, right? And so you're there just to get a glimpse at Steve as he's passing by, right? That's Zacchaeus. He's in a tree wanting to see Jesus as Jesus is passing by. But Jesus stops where Zacchaeus is, not to be seen by Zacchaeus, but to stay with Zacchaeus. Yeah. Yeah, to stay with Zacchaeus. Imagine Coach Wilkes wanting to stay with you. Zacchaeus is just thinking about seeing Jesus. And Jesus has purpose staying with Zacchaeus. Because, friends, Jesus stops for us to fulfill a purpose determined for us. Again, Zacchaeus is in the tree to see Jesus. Unlike the blind man who called out for Jesus, or the woman with the issue of blood who touches the hem of Jesus' garment, all Zacchaeus has done is climb up in a tree. That's it. But Jesus reaches the spot where Zacchaeus is, calls him by name, calls him down from the tree, and tells him, I must stay at your house today. Now, if Zacchaeus has run up a tree to see Jesus, and that's all that's been his agenda, you got to know that Zacchaeus has not prepared the house for Jesus to stay there. That's just like if you were in the parade to see Coach Wilkes. You didn't clean up the house expecting him to come and visit you. And so Zacchaeus has not prepared for Jesus staying. All he wants is to see Jesus. And by being in the tree, his aim is to see Jesus as Jesus is passing by, but Jesus has a different purpose. It's not that of being seen by Zacchaeus in a tree. Jesus wants more than that. Jesus wants Zacchaeus, first of all, to see him at eye level. That's why he says, come down. And he wants to be with Jesus, with Zacchaeus, for more than a glancing moment. He wants to stay with Zacchaeus. He wants to tarry with Zacchaeus. He wants to fellowship with Zacchaeus. He wants to stay at Zacchaeus. He doesn't even say, hey, let's stop at the Wild Wings. Have some wings and a beer. No. Jesus says, I want to come to your home. It's not, no, let's go to Starbucks and have some coffee. No. Jesus says, I want to come to your house. He wants more for Zacchaeus than Zacchaeus wants for himself. He has more in mind than Zacchaeus desires. And see, that's the thing about the Lord. The Lord comes to where we are to fulfill purposes that he has determined for us. We may want him, stop by. But he's saying, no, I want to stay. Because he has more in mind than we have in mind. He sees further than we see. He sees longer than we plan. He sees more intimately and more intricately than what we imagine. We just want to see the Lord. I'm going to go to church and just see the Lord. I'm going to log on and just see the Lord. And the Lord says, no. I got more than seeing me on my agenda. I got staying on my agenda. With us being at the level of the temporary and the transient, God said, no, I want a permanent. I want an unchanging relationship with you. That's the challenge, isn't it? The Lord's purposes always have more in mind. And here's where the real rub is, because what that often means is that his more purpose will require more from us. Zacchaeus has climbed up in a tree just to get a look at Jesus. And Jesus says, number one, you got to come down from there. And then Jesus says, I want to stay in your house. In other words, the purpose that Jesus has for Zacchaeus could not be fulfilled with Zacchaeus staying in the mode of tree looking. Zacchaeus must come down from his tree, and Jesus must stay at Zacchaeus' house that day. You know, I'm convinced we want just enough of Jesus. We don't want all Jesus all the time. And here's how I know, because of who we invite to certain things. We want just enough of Jesus, but not all Jesus all the time. I done gone to meddling now, haven't I? But Jesus says, I must stay at your house. And here's the more that the Lord has for us will often require more from and of us. And see, let's just admit that we can be comfortable with just watching Jesus pass by. We want the Lord to come by, stop by, drop in. We're comfortable eavesdropping on Jesus' conversations with others. Or we're comfortable with Jesus at tree level. That is distance between us and him. Close enough for us to see him and him see us. But not so close that he can really start meddling with us. Jesus says, no, Zacchaeus, I need for you to come down out that tree. He says, I want you to see me and I want to see you at eye level. I want us to get close. I want there to be some intimacy and some proximity. With you simply wanting to see him, Jesus says, no, I want to stay with you. Because tree level is at a distance. Eye level is at proximity. And when Jesus stops in pursuit of purpose for us, he will often call for a shift in position. He calls us out of the trees. He calls us out of spectating and eavesdropping. Calls us into intimacy and relationship. He calls us out of a passing fancy, and he's calling us into a growing love. He calls us down from the trees of second-hand relating and calls us into the realm of first-hand interaction. Calls us down from the trees of our parents' relationships and our spouses' relationships and our siblings' relationships. And he calls us into a one-on-one relationship where we come to know him for ourselves. Come on, then, just admit all of us have had tree relationships with Jesus. And the Lord says, tree is fine if all that you want is to see me. But if you want to know who I am and what I can do for your life, you got to come out your tree. You got to come out your tree and know me for who I am. And notice, if you will, Jesus calls Zacchaeus with a sense of urgency. He says, come down immediately. And he says, I got to stay at your house today. Now, you know, Jesus could at least give me some warning to get my house together. I got dishes, I got stuff in the kitchen, stuff on the floor. But Jesus says, right now, immediately, it's got to be done now. Zacchaeus had to come down that moment because Jesus wanted to stay with him that day, and he didn't want any of the day wasted because Jesus' urgent promptings are tied to his pressing purposes. Jesus' urgent promptings are tied to his pressing purpose. Has the Lord ever put something on you and just wouldn't let you go? I mean, put something on you and, maybe he woke you up at an early hour, put something on your mind, and you're like, okay, Jesus, that's good. Can we talk about it at 7? And he just kept, no, we need to talk about it now. And you're like, but Jesus, I got a meeting at 8. Can we talk about it? His urgent promptings. His urgent promptings are tied to his pressing purposes. When Jesus prompts you with a sense of the immediate, it's tied to something pressing in the present. There's something for you to experience in the immediate sense, something for you that day. It may be something for you to encounter or avoid that day. Maybe something for you to accomplish on that day. Maybe something for you to intervene in that day. His urgent promptings are for pressing purposes. And I don't know what promptings the Lord has been putting in you or on you, but if he's been putting some urgent promptings, it's because there's a pressing purpose. And you will only realize the full meaning of the pressing purpose when you give in to the urgent prompting. Look at Zacchaeus' response. Now, we don't know how high the tree was. We don't know how hard it was for him to climb it. So Jesus telling him to come down, we don't know what he's thinking about. Now, I done just climbed up this tree to see Jesus. Now he's telling me I got to come down. Climbing up some things are much easier than climbing down. But here's what it says. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save those that were lost. Zacchaeus comes down at once and welcomes Jesus gladly. With no preparation, Zacchaeus has immediately moved and welcomed Jesus into his home. Now, we don't know what Miss Zacchaeus is saying right in through here. You could have called me. We don't know any of that. Well, they didn't have any phones back then, but send a donkey or something to let me know. Here comes Zacchaeus with Jesus into the house. And Jesus came to him as he was. Jesus went into his house as it was. There was no time to tidy up or clean up. Jesus went to him as he was and to his house as it was. And friends, that's the way it is with Jesus. He comes to us as we are and to where we are as it is. Because the urgency and the immediacy is as you are and as it is. It is as you are and as your things are. It is as you are and where your life is. And that is the wonder and grace of it all. The Lord comes to us as we are, where we are, as things are, because he knows who we are. He knows where we are. And guess what? He knows how things are wherever we are. He knows how compromised we are and how compromised things are. He knows how jacked up we are and how jacked up the house is. He still insists on coming immediately and his staying immediately. And the sooner that we come to him, the sooner that he begins to stay, and the sooner things can change. You see, things couldn't change with Zacchaeus up in the tree. And friends, let me tell you something. things can't change with you up in the tree. It's when you come down out of your tree, when you come as you are and you take him to where you are as it is his presence, it is his staying, it is his being with you that makes change possible. In other words, Jesus isn't waiting for you to get stuff straight to stay. If he was waiting, he wouldn't be talking to you right now. But he knows exactly who you are and where you are and how things are. And he says, I want to stay with you as you are, where you are, wherever you are, just as I am, without one plea. But that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to the old Lamb of God, right where you are. Right where he is, dishes, clothes, laundry. That's how it is inside the house. Then there are folk outside the house got something to say. Outside the house, people are saying, he's going to be a guest with a sinner. He's going to be with Zacchaeus. That boy ain't never been any good. Cheating us out of all our money, traitor to the nation. Jesus wants to hang out with somebody like that. And it's in the midst of that Zacchaeus stands up and demonstrates the change that Jesus has made. Jesus has changed Zacchaeus' trust and focus. Zacchaeus is sorry for his sins, and he demonstrates it through the restitution that he makes. He says, Lord, I'm sorry. And he says, if I've cheated, well, now he knew that he had cheated people. He says, now if I've cheated, I will pay it back 4 times. Y'all know how we are, if I did it. But the change is so radical that he goes beyond the requirements of the law. 4 times as much, that's beyond the law, because the change has been made on the inside. Money is no longer the center of his life. Selfish gain is no longer the motivation of his life. Oppression is no longer the tenor of his life. Jesus has changed it all. You see, friends, Jesus stops where we are and how we are, but never to leave us where we are and as we are. Yeah, he stops where we are and as we are, but it's never to leave us at where we are and as we are. While grace and mercy prompts God to come to us as we are and where we are, the purpose and power of God seeks to propel us from where we are and who we are to where and who God desires us to be. God's entry and staying with us as we are and where we are compels and propels us into transformation and growth. And while we may not be everything that we should be, we are not everything that we used to be. And let me help somebody right here, because the enemy hits you with where you've yet to arrive. The enemy hits you with where you still fall short. That's where the enemy hits you. But God has sent me to have you look back at where you were and the fact that you aren't still there anymore. That while you may not be all there yet, the shout should be, you are still not back there. You may not be up there, but at least you're not still back there. And I wonder, is there anybody who can just give God thanks that you are not still back there? Can you shout off the fact that you are not still back there? I believe somebody's getting happy just thinking about, because you know what was back there, how you were back there, how back there had you, and what you could not get out of back then, what you would not let go of back there. But your shout is, I'm not still back there. And whether you may be 1 day removed or 1 month removed or 1 year removed from back there, you are 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year better than you were. I wonder, is there anybody who can make the devil a liar and say, I may not be everything, but I sure ain't back there, and God has been working on my life. People want to keep you back there, but you're not back there. People want to remind you of back there, but you're not back there. The enemy wants to raise up images of back there, but you are not back there. Jesus responds to Zacchaeus, announcing that salvation has come to his house, because he too is a son of Abraham, and that the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Look at it. People on the outside calling Zacchaeus a sinner. Jesus declares him to be saved and to be a son of Abraham. People on the outside calling him a traitor to the nation, separate category of unclean. But Jesus says, no, he's saved. He's a son of Abraham. He's an heir to the promise, and he's been made right by the same faith that made Abraham right. Because Jesus said, I came to seek and to save the lost. And while that was true in a general sense, Jesus demonstrates that it's true in a specific sense. And here is the revelation that really gets me. The heart of God, which is for everybody, is also the heart of God that is after each body. The heart of God that is for everyone is the heart that is after each one. While Jesus came to seek and to save everybody on that day and in that moment, Jesus came for Zacchaeus. Jesus was headed to die to save everybody, but Jesus stops and declares salvation for the one man named Zacchaeus, because the God whose heart is for everyone is the God whose heart is for each one. The God who loves everybody is the God who loves each one person. With Jesus on his way to Jerusalem for everybody, he stops at a tree for one man named Zacchaeus. And we're going to see it again in Luke chapter 23, where Jesus is now on the cross. And at verse 34, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's a prayer for everybody. But when you get down to verse 42, there is a thief that says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus responds with the words, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. With Jesus praying forgiveness for everyone and dying for everybody, Jesus promises one person presence in paradise on that very day. And then in John chapter 19, when he's dying for everybody, he then gives John to his mother and his mother to John, because the God whose heart is for everybody is the God whose heart is for each one of us. In other words, he died for everybody and he died for each one of us. And early Sunday morning, God raised him from the dead for everybody, and he raised him from the dead for each person. And I don't know if you're really tracking with me, but I'm so glad that I was in both categories. I was in the everybody category, and then one day I heard the voice of Jesus say, come unto me and rest. Lay down thy weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast. And I came to Jesus just as I was weary, worn, and sad. I found in him a resting place, and the Lord has made me glad. And I found out that the God that loved everybody is the God that loved me. The God that could forgive everybody is the God who forgives me. The God who has a purpose for everybody is the God who has a purpose for me. And I'm glad that his love for everybody equaled his love for me. As he saw everybody lost, he saw me lost. And as he wanted everybody saved, he wanted me saved. And y'all are acting like this ain't personal, but if you are saved, you ought to be glad that the Lord that wanted everybody, he wanted you. The Lord that was saving everybody, he wanted to save you. That you were not outside of the locus of his affection and his intention. And that while on others he was calling, he did not pass you by. Am I talking to anybody in here? Is there anybody out there, wherever you are, can you just tweet, he wanted me, he loved me, he cared about me, he saved me, he redeemed me, he rescued me. The God who wants everybody, the God who wants you. Everybody, that's general. You, that's specific. Everybody, you don't know everything about everybody, but you do know you. And the Lord who knows you is the Lord that wants you.